Okay, I guess this is happening. Are you done? Ow, fuck. So I'm a literature graduate student in Germany now at Goethe University, which means that this channel is about to get crazy more literary, as if it wasn't already. If you want to follow along with the stories and texts that we are discussing in my classes and seminars and such, you can keep up by hitting the subscribe button and then making sure that the bell icon is also active, so that way you don't miss any of my insane and dumb babbling about books and stories and poems and such. One of my main seminars this term is called Late Victorian Mummy Fiction, which is both oddly specific and also how much more perfect can you get for, like, matching my jam. This is going to be a good term, I hope. Arthur Conan Doyle, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, don't forget, was a Renaissance man in addition to being a writer. While he's most famous for creating the sort of brilliant, logically inclined, no-nonsense Sherlock Holmes character, he was also a great many other things. A cricketer, a boxer, a billiards player in the realm of sport, a pro-war political activist and a liberal unionist politically, an actual consulting detective, like a real consulting detective on 2 closed cases, which resulted in 2 men actually being exonerated for crimes that they did not commit. But Doyle was also, and most relevantly to this story, a doctor. The story, The Ring of Thoth, The Ring of That Thing, goes like this. A gentleman named John Vanistart Smith was a great scientific mind, but was of the sort who could not decide what he actually wanted to do with his life. So he jumped from zoology and botany to chemistry to what would loosely be termed Orientalism at the time, and he was a genius in all of those fields. So he finally set himself down on Egyptology, and he became a very respected author of journals and papers on the subject. As a result of his complete obsession with Egypt, he visited the collections of ancient artifacts at the French museum, the Louvre, on a consistent basis for his research. And one day he was there looking at some papyrus for his work when he chanced to lay eyes on a gentleman working at the collection, with whom he is immediately entranced. And he asks if this man is Egyptian, because his eyes, his skin, and his general appearance said that it was so, but not just like normal Egyptian. John sort of clocked him as being ancient Egyptian, but the guy responds that he's actually French. Of course, John can't actually get this enthrallingly Egyptian man out of his mind, but he sits down in an alcove behind a door to sort of collect his thoughts and write down the research that he was working on. And in doing so, this dumb falls asleep at his desk. Not even at just at a little table behind a door in the Louvre, and he falls so super deep asleep that nobody finds him behind the door, and the museum straight up closes up. So he wakes up at 1 o'clock in the morning to find that he is still in the museum. And so he's sort of amused by it, and he thinks maybe he should find some night attendant or janitor or something that will let him out a side door or something, when he sees a light coming for the room where he is. So he sort of half hides behind the door. The footfalls are too quiet to be a normal attendant or whatever, but he sees that man from before creep into the room and then grab a mummy from one of the mummy cases and unwrap it and then start to mouth kiss it, on the lips, full with his actual mouth. And then so he goes to a box full of rings and jewelry and things that were also displayed there, and he pulls out a jar of some sort of liquid, and then he fiddles with a whole bunch of the rings and such for a bit before he finds the one that he wants, and he dips it in the chemical, and when that proves somehow that it's the correct one, he gets really excited and he drops the jar and it spills on the floor, and so he goes to wipe it up and it spills right to where John's feet are, right where he's hiding, which is pretty unlucky. So John, unabashed by this, comes from behind the door, and he's like, "Oh, hey, I fell asleep behind the door here, haha, so if you could just, maybe let me out the back or something, I'll be on my way, and I will not tell anyone what I have seen." And then the guy pulls out, a long knife, and is like, "You watched me the whole time?" And John's like, "Yeah, I kind of did. I must admit to having watched you the whole time." And the guy kind of really like suspicious eyes like, kind of takes the knife and puts it away real slow like. He kind of calms down and he goes, seriously, if I had seen you like a few minutes ago, like before I got done what I set out to do here, you would be in ribbons in a pile of red goop on the floor by now, my dude. So the guy asks for John's name, and when John tells him, he's like, aren't you that guy who wrote like a big paper on Egypt like just recently? And John's like, yeah, that's totally me. And then the guy's like, yeah, you suck. Like, you don't know anything. Your knowledge of ancient Egypt is better than basically everyone else, but you're still dead wrong about most stuff, to which John takes a little bit of offense. But he then says, the keystone of our old life in Egypt was not the inscriptions or monuments of which you make so much, but was our hermetic philosophy and mystic knowledge, of which you say so little or nothing. Now, John's not stupid, he's a genius, so he is astute enough to catch the fact that this guy just said, our old life. But just then, the mummy with whom the man had been doing tongue gymnastics only moments ago deteriorates before their eyes. The man sort of freaks out and then steels himself with some effort and says that it doesn't matter, that the old curse is broken, and that he can now rejoin her. He sort of apologizes for the whole "I definitely would have killed you to death minutes ago" remark, and offers to lead John out to the street. But then he, like, as they walk towards the door out to the street, he hesitates and then invites John into another room. So John, an idiot who does not know what is good for him and is too curious to leave well enough alone, cheerfully goes with him. And they hole up for a minute in this man's quarters. The room is sort of decorated with a bunch of ancient Egyptian relics and trinkets, and John notes, like, oh dang, these look real wild. So the man settles in, and he tells John that there's probably some logic in telling someone what exactly is actually happening right now, so that there is a record of it, for better or worse. Of course, now you can see where this is going, I hope. The man is actually a several thousand-year-old Egyptian son of the head priest of the temple of Abaris named Sosra. He tells John that there's basically no such thing as magic, and that there's only science. Science and gods. He apparently did like lots of ancient advanced chemistry and found the secret to a crazy long lifespan that also granted immunity from disease, immunity from poison, and immunity from just injury. Like, you can't be harmed. And he says that medicine's entire purpose is basically to chase off disease when it comes by, so why not chase off the biggest disease? Death. His elixir does not grant him complete immortality, but it's functionally the same thing. It's just a lifespan that is several thousand years long before the elixir wears off and he would eventually die. You have an elixir of effective immortality. What's the next logical step? He obviously gives it to his friends. Well, first he injects a cat with it, which he insists is still alive in Egypt right now. But then he finds a friend in a priest of the god Thoth called Parmes, and shares the secret with him so that those two could always be like totally best buds, two bros chilling in a hot tub 5 feet apart forever. So he and Parmes were basically celebrities after that point, because people knew about their sort of functional immortality, and that Sosra was the one who did all the work to make it happen, and so like people bowed their heads when they walked by. So when Sosra and Parmes meet the beautiful daughter of a governor in town because of the war that is happening, both of them were immediately struck with love for her. Sosra won her attention and then offered her the secret to immortality, because obviously, right? But she was pious to her gods, so when she asks Sosra if Osiris had intended for everyone to have crazy long lives, why didn't he just do that for us? Which is a good point, actually. But it's all science, so it's cool, it's science. So she asks for one night to think about it, and he lets her leave. And then overnight, she catches this horrible, deadly disease called the white fever and immediately dies. Bummer. So he tries for months to kill himself so that he could rejoin her in the afterlife. But he's literally immune to all forms of damage, so he's pretty out of luck. One day though, Parmes shows up to him and is like, listen, you let her die, which was like not a bro thing to do, so I'm gonna go to her tomb and also die so that I can be with her, since you will never be able to because you suck. You might have had her for a short time in life, but being dead is eternity, bro, and you lost out on that, and I'm gonna go take it. You suck. And of course, Sasra calls him out on the fact that he's got the invulnerability potion, but Parmes then is like, no. I found a stronger chemical, a stronger reactive elixir that will undo your stupid immortality garbage. And not only have I already taken it, but I will also never ever tell you what it was or where it was because you suck and I hate you. So then he leaves Sasra with one unintentional clue. The key to the secret is in the Ring of Thoth. And it literally only exists there and nowhere else, and this is the secret ingredient that will never ever be made again by anybody. If you want the thing, you have to find the Ring of Thoth. Sasra is like, well, where is the ring? And Parmes is like, I'm not telling you because you suck. Like, you will literally never find it because I hate you and you suck. Parmes dies in like an hour, which is a super bummer because now there are no other immortals, which means that Sasra has to watch everyone that he meets die in like a time frame of seconds. He tries to go through Parmes's papers and research and chemical stuff to try to get some answers, but then that war that I mentioned a minute ago that had been just happening in the background ends up with him being captured and his whole city is destroyed, including Parmes's lab and his papers. So Sasra is seriously out of luck for the next couple thousand years. Since he lives forever, he finds himself in all kinds of like social positions and situations, but always has himself enough money to buy the papers that scholars have been writing about ancient Egypt, in the hope that one day either the body of his beloved or the ring would be found. And one day he actually reads that literally both of them were found at the same time in the same place and brought to the Louvre. Convenient. So he applies to be an attendant at the Louvre and gets the job and moves his stuff into the room where he and John are now sitting at this very moment having this discussion. It is his first night there and also his last because he plans to use the secret poison in the Ring of Thoth to finally kill himself and end his misery. So, you can do with this information what you like because I'm going to be dead in a couple hours and it won't matter to me anymore. So he lets John back out onto the street out of like a back door, and John sort of keeps the affair to himself. But then 2 days later in the newspaper, he reads that there was an incident at the Louvre where an attendant was found dead, clutching the body of an unwrapped mummy so tightly that they had to be pulled apart. Authorities think that this attendant was going to try to steal this mummy and then, like, leave and sell it to somebody, but then during the process of the thievery, he accidentally died of a pre-existing heart condition. That's the whole story. Let's talk about it. Remember at the beginning of this video how I made a big deal about Doyle being a doctor? Well, he was also way into, like, forms of the occult, specifically with the idea of being able to contact the dead after they have died, obviously. This never crossed into the territory of magic or sorcery, however. He was consistently a sort of spiritual man, and it was the Christian mysticism that he tried to rationalize, so no sorcery for him. That no magic mindset was mixed with his logical nature, and of course him having been a doctor. That may well be why the ancient chemist, scientist Sosra made a point of telling John that the secret to functional immortality is and always was scientific and chemical in nature, and could very well theoretically be discovered again by another really highly advanced mind. His long life was not anything mystical at all, but was purely scientific. Just like Doyle was trying to be with his weird fascination, his on-off love-hate relationship with the occult and with necromancy. Wild, right? There is a sort of parallelism between John, who flirted with several different courses of learning and expertise before finding the one that would keep him, and Sosra, who'd mastered his science as a teenager and basically stayed young forever because of his single-minded devotion to that one specific subject. It's interesting that this comparison is there because neither of them is actually cast in a better light, really. Like, John is expert level at no less than 4 fields, where Sosra is basically god level at biology and chemistry, and yet both of them yearn for more knowledge that may one day lead to a darker path, or, as was the case with Sosra, actually did lead to that darker path. Is this some sort of, like, cautionary tale? Like Sosra warning John not to get too obsessed with the ancient forbidden knowledge, because if he does, he'll, discover the potion for eternal life? Or is this like a commentary on the idea that there have existed societies that we barely know about, if at all, that were far superior in science and thought and intellect to the present? It reminds me sort of the vague Atlantis myth, where they were supremely ancient, like thousands of years before Greece, but nonetheless possessed scientific discoveries that, if we are to believe the writings of Plato, we have yet to achieve even now in 2020. A lot of this story has elements of like the sort of modern comedy in it. A sort of nerdy, bookish protagonist finds himself confronted with something that he absolutely shouldn't have seen and has to find a way to talk himself out of it, while the other person overshares by leagues and leagues about themselves. There's a, "Oh, what could one day possibly hurt?" line directly in the text that leads straight to disaster, like it always does. And then there's the ironic, "I've literally had all the time in the world, so I know every language in existence because they're all so boring" part that, like, basically every comedy involving vampires hits right on the nose. So this story could very easily be adapted into sort of like a modernized telling with almost nothing changed. I'd watch it. Heck, I'd try out for the part of John.
My name is John Vanistard Smith. I'm an Egyptologist, and I'm damn good at my job. I'm here for one thing, and one thing only: to study really old stuff.
The biggest thing I can take away from the story, however, is the idea that even with all of modern science and historical findings, there's never really truly a way to know everything about the distant past. The contemporary historian may well think that they know what went down, what was happening, like all the cultural things about it, but deep down inside we're all secretly waiting for a 4 millennia old Egyptian to mosey in and tell us that all of our knowledge about the subject is wrong, and we suck, even though we might be less wrong than everyone else. Interestingly, this story, while it may have to do with the dead and eternal life and so-called curses, isn't actually a horror story. In fact, I would label it more of a science fiction story than anything else, in the same vein as like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. There are elements of a horror story in it, like the sort of unfathomable passage of time as a metaphor for the eternal blackness of death, but it sort of lacks the key factor that would classify it as Gothic fiction. There's no exploration of the sublime in it, no invocation of the nameless feeling that shares a bed with fear but wakes up on the same side of the bed as you. Sosra actually straight up says in the story that he should be pitied more than feared, and he tells us a sad story about his dead girlfriend and his inability to join her. The story might be one that is supernatural in its framework, but it's really a science fiction story. Maybe Sosra's right, and one day we will discover that elixir that gave him his several thousand-year lifespan. Maybe that metaphor is actually already well on its way in the form of cybernetics and the digitization of consciousness. But enough about Shadowrun. What do you take away from this story? Do you agree with any of the points that I've made? Do you have any points of your own that you'd like to address? Let's go ahead and share them in the comments below. Oh no, my hot lady friend is dead and I must live forever. The irony! Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, as I mentioned before, the like and subscribe buttons are just below the video. Hit the bell button so that you don't miss any of the things that I said. You can also follow me on some of my socials. I've got a Discord down in the description, as well as like a Facebook and a Twitter that I don't really do anything with because Facebook suck. Thank you guys so much for watching. If y'all are some of my classmates, I hope that you found this at least amusing, if not useful. I will see you guys next time.